Hello, and welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report. I'm Kevin Mannix, the host for this program, and I'm glad to have you with us today as we talk about juvenile justice issues affecting Oregonians, especially in Marion County, but Marion County can serve as an example for the rest of the state. Our guest today is a gentleman who is the director of the Juvenile Department for Marion County, Larry Oglesby. Larry, welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report.
Welcome, thank you, Kevin. Pleasure to be here.
Well, Larry, one of the things we try to do on this show is give folks an opportunity to learn a little bit about the individuals or the personalities who are in government offices, because they may read about you in the news and wonder, who is this guy anyway? In a couple of minutes, we'll talk about the job, but in terms of you as a person, where do you hail from?
Actually, I'm from this area. I grew up out in Brooks, Lake LaBiche area on an onion farm. Went to Salem schools, graduated from North Salem High, Oregon State University, and then have been most of my adult life here in the Salem area as well.
Oh, so you're pretty firmly rooted in the Mid-Willamette Valley.
Yes.
Well, what brought you into juvenile justice issues? Was this something you thought about in college or something that came about later on?
Actually, it did come about later on. My college major was social science. I minored in journalism, and I was actually a reporter my first couple jobs out of college in Redding, California, and then here in Salem. I then moved on to Chemeketa Community College and worked in public information for the college. Got involved at that time in a local classified employees association, and eventually moved on into union advocacy with the Oregon Public Employees Union. And during that time, I was representing employees in Marion County, including the juvenile department. And when the director then moved on to the legislature, I applied for that job and moved into the juvenile justice system, and been doing that for about 13 years now.
I would think a couple of things that you just mentioned would tie in pretty well. First of all, being a reporter would help you see from the other side how you may want to get information out to the public, but your organizing work, your work with public employees, and of course some of those public employees were in juvenile justice, would also connect you up with something else that we've been trying to do in Oregon, which is organize juvenile justice systems. But in this job for the last 13 years, what kind of trends and changes have you seen?
Well, quite a few, actually. In those 13 years, I've been the lobbyist for the Statewide Juvenile Directors Association all of that time, 6 sessions now. So I've seen the system really move from one that was judge-focused, judge-centered, where the judges were actually in charge of the juvenile departments, to one where it became more of a county administrative agency. I've seen the circumstance where there's been a greater need to have a presence at the legislature to try to bring forth the issues that are important to juvenile justice, the concerns about the lack of resources to adequately deal with the increasing number of offenders and the more serious offenders. So what we have tried to do over the last 6 years as juvenile department directors is focus that attention. We started that in 1994 with a statewide juvenile justice summit. We had about 500 people from around the state, legislators, county commissioners, district attorneys, law enforcement officers, educators, to look at what the system needed and sort of develop a blueprint for the system. And subsequent to that, then we had 2 governor's task forces. Then came Senate Bill 1, and then this last session we had the Juvenile Crime Prevention Partnership Initiative. So we've had incremental steps to both identify the needs of the system and then find a way to try to address some of those.
Well, let's pause for a moment, and I'll ask you a very basic question, because this is probably on the minds of many a citizen who would be watching, which is, what does a juvenile department do in a given county on a generic basis, but you can talk really specifically from the Marion County perspective?
Well, the juvenile department is responsible for serving the court in terms of youth who have been referred for delinquent offenses. Basically, crimes or acts, if committed by adults, would be crimes. Everything from shoplifting to murder. We also receive referrals from kids who have committed what are called status offenses, runaway, minor in possession of tobacco, those kind of things that are seen as lesser offenses but are still violations of law or statute. So our job is to work with those youth and their families to try to help them change their lives and become rehabilitated, to work with the court in supervising kids who are on probation. We run a detention facility for kids who need to be removed from society and locked up for a short period of time. In our county, we also have an education program, which is a partnership with Salem-Kaiser Schools for kids who are on probation to the court. We also are fortunate to have a work and community service and vocational program to give some of these kids the opportunity to learn some skills, develop some good work habits, and pay some restitution back to their victims, and we're real proud of that program.
Now, you mentioned Senate Bill 1, which passed in the 1995 legislative session. This was a comprehensive revamping of the juvenile justice system in Oregon, and it set up the Oregon Youth Authority as the state network for, I'll call it, accountability and rehabilitation. That is, the more serious offenders, especially violent offenders, would be sent to the custody of the Oregon Youth Authority. But at the same time, the county operations were maintained under this reorganized system, with the focus being, of course, the Juvenile Justice Department obligations, working with the courts. It seems to me, though, that we've recognized through this legislation and through the funding mechanisms greater importance in terms of the juvenile director's role at the county level, having the state up there with the violent criminals and the longer-term sanctions, I'll call them, but understanding, too, that there's more to juvenile justice than just apprehending people. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That really is the partnership between the state and the local county juvenile departments. And as you mentioned, the state gets the offenders who are the more serious ones, the longer-term ones, the more violent ones, but not before they have come through the local system. And what we try to do at the local level is to intervene as soon as possible with these youths and try to head them off from becoming the more serious violent offenders who will become in the OIA system, the state system, or in the adult correction system. And what we have tried to do of late is tried to focus on programs that are research-based, that show that they have been effective in other jurisdictions, and then try to measure the impact of those programs once we're doing them so we can find out which ones are going to work best with a given group of youth.
Now, let's talk about that for a moment, if we could. You talk about research-based. First of all, there's been some evaluation objectively that these are programs that work. Mm-hmm. And then you're focusing on the outcome. What happens if you use this program? What's going to happen to the juvenile? What kind of programs have you been looking at in Marion County and trying to implement?
In Marion County, we are currently implementing two things. One is an expansion of our GAP program, or Guaranteed Attendance Program. It's a staff secure shelter program where youth are under supervision at night at the juvenile department in a residential setting, and then either in a work or a school program during the daytime. So this is an opportunity for those youth who are not quite as much of a danger to the society to need to be in detention to have the opportunity to have more structure in their lives, better opportunity to work under that supervision. The second part of that is what we call the prevention or early intervention portion, and that's our family support teams. And what we are doing is focusing on younger offenders, 14 and under, who are either first or second time offenders, and their families. And it's based on a multisystemic therapy approach that's been proven to work in other communities around the country. And once a youth qualifies for the program, then the whole family qualifies for the program. And the concept is that these youth come out of, in many cases, home settings that contribute to their being in the juvenile system. And you can't fix the youth, sort of, without dealing with the other family issues. So we would provide services to any siblings in that family and parents. If parents have domestic violence issues, substance abuse issues that contribute to this youth being in the system, we want to work with that family unit to deal with those issues. And the cornerstone of that is a fund of money that comes along with that to provide individualized service plan services. So in other words, every family's needs are different. And so we try to basically craft a plan that works for that particular family to address those issues.
All right, so you're identifying families of youngsters who are at risk. They're at risk because they've already self-identified themselves through some inappropriate activity, basically what would be for an adult usually a lower level criminal activity, but they're into the entry-level problem. Mm-hmm. They may have had problems before, which we can deal with separately, but now they've come to your attention. And what you're trying to do is package an evaluation and services for the family, sort of this cocoon of, we hope, support around the youngster. And the cocoon is failing, so you want to make sure that that family network is being worked on. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. You're trying to customize the services and programs for that family.
That's correct, and you hit on a key element of that, and that is the evaluation component. One of the other things that we're going to try to do is, with as many families as possible, and certainly all the ones that will be involved in this strategy, is do a face-to-face assessment of that youth and that family situation so we can identify which ones are at greatest need and at greatest risk. You can get a police report alleging theft 3 on one youth and another youth, and they could come from totally different backgrounds. One can be vitally in need of services. The other, perhaps being arrested that first time, will be all that youth needs to change their behavior. So the key is to be able to have that opportunity to identify what are the needs of that youth, what are the issues in that family, so we can address those.
Now, if you get into this a little bit more, say you've got a parent of a 14-year-old boy who's known to the parent to have been shoplifting but hasn't been caught. What would that parent do in Marion County if they wanted some help dealing with that problem? Should they first turn to their school, their church? Of course, that's always an option, I would think. But where does the juvenile department fit in with that?
Well, there are several answers to that, several possible answers to that. The first that comes to mind are the youth services teams, which work in the schools, and the schools are the people who see that kid most of the time, more than the parents even in a given day's time. They see the behaviors, and we have multidisciplinary groups who work in the schools, juvenile department employees, school counselors, mental health workers, and so when a parent becomes aware of that kind of behavior, they can talk with the schools about a referral to the youth services team. There are also counseling resources available in the community that they could refer to, and certainly you mentioned churches. Churches have a lot of resources and a lot of capacity to help families, and that's one of the areas that we in Marion County are trying to expand upon is the partnership really with our local faith community and our local business community, and Commissioner Mike Ryan has sort of taken the lead on that in a very big way. We've had a guest speaker come in this community in the last week or so to deal with the issues of gangs, of violence, youth violence, of substance abuse in a very concentrated way to try to highlight the issues there and the opportunities to work with churches and others in the faith community to address some of those key issues.
So the parent who's got a child that the parent thinks is in trouble, and the parent, of course, should first try to deal with it within the family, and perhaps the family can deal with it and resolve it. But if they're looking for outside help, one place to go to would be, of course, the family church, the minister. Another place, I assume, if there seems to be a mental health issue, might be the mental health services folks from the county. But if they need some direct assistance in terms of what's going on with the youngster, they could also talk to school counseling officials.
School counselors, or they can call us, the juvenile department. A lot of folks maybe not be wanting to do that. You know, they don't want their kid in the system, as it were. But you know, we do try to work with families to prevent them from coming in as well. Many of our communities have community progress teams, which are citizen-based groups who are developing local resources, parent training groups as an example, which are opportunities for parents to gain some skills to deal with that. It may not be a kid who's been arrested, it may just be a kid who is exhibiting out-of-control behavior, and if parents are looking for assistance in doing that, there's a variety of resources in most of our communities in Marion County dealing with those kinds of issues.
Absent some serious crime that's brought to your attention, I assume a parent asking for help can usually assume that unless there's already been some involvement in the juvenile justice system, you're not rushing out there with handcuffs ready to take Johnny away, but you want to be able to provide a support network to turn him in the right direction.
That's true, and we try to do that through our partnership with the community. I mean, the simple reality is, with the number of kids that we see who have been arrested, who are in need of serious intervention and our services at the formal level, we couldn't possibly deal with all those. So the role of the community in working with us in a comprehensive way is really critical for us as a community to be able to address these issues.
All right, well, we'll pause on that for a moment while I mention to our audience that you're with us on the Kevin Mannix Report, named after me, Kevin Mannix. I'm your interviewer for this program. Our guest today is Larry Oglesby, who is the Juvenile Department Director for Marion County. If you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact me at the Kevin Mannix Report. Our address is 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301, so you can drop us a note in the old-fashioned mail. If you want to reach me by email, the address is kevin@mannix.com. And if you want to reach me by phone, you can call 503-364-1913. We're always happy to hear from you. Returning now to our guest, Larry Oglesby, I'm curious about the philosophy now that's being developed in Marion County. And you've mentioned to me before the show that the county commissioners are now moving in new directions. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Commissioners recently released I guess I would call it a policy and purpose philosophy statement regarding the juvenile justice system in Marion County. And it identifies public safety as the primary role of the juvenile department, the primary responsibility. And it defines our role in terms of dealing with the most delinquent youth first as a means of directing, developing that public safety for our community. And it also describes the role of us working with and providing leadership with others, such as the faith community, the business community, the local community, cities, schools, and others, to try to not only intervene with kids and families in trouble, but also try to prevent those things from happening. And there's a whole variety of activities going on in all of our communities dealing with such things as after-school programs, the Youth Compact here in the Salem-Keizer area, which includes the schools, the county, the cities. They're looking at after-school activities as an opportunity to help prevent juvenile crime, knowing that those after-school hours are statistically the hours where most juvenile crime is committed, when kids are out of school, parents aren't home from work yet, and that's a critical time. So that's one of the initiatives we're trying to do in that regard.
Can I ask you a question about that? Should we, as a goal, look towards having some comprehensive after-school programs available, I would hope, at every school and at Boys and Girls Clubs? The Boys and Girls Clubs are already there, the Y is there, but in terms of physical facilities, at every school throughout a county?
That would certainly be ideal, and there's actually efforts being made in that direction. In Salem-Keizer District, I know there are a couple schools that have the schools open for afternoon and evening programs. It's sort of the lighted schools concept, where the buildings become available for use after school hours, not necessarily having the teachers or school personnel supervising what's going on there, but perhaps having volunteers, perhaps seniors come into the schools and serve as the people in charge of that area, because you have certain liability issues to deal with that. But to use those buildings and to use those facilities for additional hours per day to be able to provide those opportunities. And there are some efforts being made to do that. It's partly a financial issue. But people, I think, are really working hard to make that happen. And I think that has been shown in other communities to be a very successful strategy.
I would think that strategy fits in with what you've been talking about, because you have to run the gamut from prevention through accountability, even to some extent rehabilitation, in the sense that you at least can rehabilitate in the community. Long-term incarceration / rehabilitation would be more the Oregon Youth Authority type offender. But I would think that would fit in with the prevention mode that you've been talking about.
Well, it really does, and one of the things that we try to do in that realm of rehabilitation is help the youth who are in that system do a couple things. Learn empathy for their victims. Believe it or not, a lot of these kids don't think about the impacts on their crimes on people in the community, and we help them to understand that. We see that as a key toward rehabilitation of the youth offenders. And then also the involvement of the victims, to the extent they want to be involved in things like victim offender reconciliation programs, a mediation program. Neighbor to Neighbor here in Salem provides those kind of services where youth can sit down across from their victim and have a conversation that helps them understand the impact and helps provide sort of a healing process for the victim. We also see that kind of concept in the peer courts, which are starting up around Marion County in a variety of locations, to have youth basically be judged by their peers in terms of what kind of consequences for their crimes. So we see involving more of the community at all levels as really key to both the reformation and the rehabilitation of the offender, as well as having the community feel a part of the system and some responsibility for making this thing work.
Well, as you're trying to make this thing work, you've also turned to the state for some help. And during the past session in 1999, there was an appropriation of about $20 million under Senate Bill 555, or in conjunction with Senate Bill 555, to expand juvenile programs at the county level. Do you want to talk a little about that?
Sure. The programs that I mentioned earlier, the Expanded Gap program was one of those. That's in the basic services category, one of the basic parts of any juvenile system. The one thing that gave us a particular opportunity to do is expand the range of services for girls and young women. The current program is 10 boys. The expanded program will be 25 kids, including 10 girls. So for the first time, they'll have an opportunity to utilize that program. And one of the key themes in this juvenile crime prevention partnership that all 36 counties are involved in are providing gender-specific services. A service that works well for boys may not work well for girls. Boys are different than girls and in a variety of ways, including how they respond to a variety of services. So making programs specific to the needs of young women, and also programs that are culturally competent, that recognize cultural differences. And in this community, we have a growing Hispanic population, and we need to do a better job and are trying to do a better job of responding in more appropriate ways in dealing with the needs of those youth and families who are in the juvenile system. So we have a good start on the expanded programs. We're implementing in this spring, and we'll have about a year's track record before we come back to the legislature next session.
Now, the legislature appropriated $20 million of a requested $30 million. I understand you will be requesting the full funding this next round again.
That's correct. The request, which will be before the legislature, would be to expand the $20 million to the $30 million, which was the original target. As you may recall, the plans that counties developed were developed before the last legislature based on that $30 million level. And that would be a level we think we could have really good results and good impact from. This biennium, because we're getting a late start in implementation, we're able to gear up the programs pretty well, but if we're not successful with the additional $10 million, those programs will not be fully realized as envisioned.
I see what you're saying. In other words, because the session ran until July, and of course the fiscal year started July 1, by the time you knew you finally had the funds arriving to do these programs, there's a ramp-up time. Mm-hmm. So you've been ramping up, and so you may be doing, I'm making up the figure, you may be hitting a $25 million biennium level of activity. Maybe it's even $30 million because of the late start. But then you're going to need that continued funding to keep the activity going.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And, we believe that we're going to be able to do good work at the $20 million level. We believe, though, that at the $30 million level we'll do much broader work and with a broader variety of youth and families.
Well, in fact, I was on one of the committees that reviewed this, and I was an advocate for the $30 million funding in the first place. So I certainly saw that there were a lot of efficiencies that were being sought. This was not a gold brick program. It was a program that was really managed very well in terms of its component parts. I guess part of the pitch we need to get out there to legislators is how important this is as part of community involvement and work with kids, that the state is finally fostering more community activity. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think it does give us a greater opportunity to involve the community in these activities. It's also an opportunity, we hope, and this is how it's designed, to intervene with some of these kids earlier so they're not taking some of these more expensive services, and we can begin to focus more on the younger kids. And I know that was the debate last session, will be the debate again this session. Should we spend the money on the older delinquent kid or the younger kid, who needs preventive services? And the reality, I believe, is we need to do both. And the more successful we can become in heading off these kids who are going to need those more expensive services at the county level and at the state level, then the better off we'll be to begin to move further down the continuum and provide more prevention services. This strategy is based really on early intervention. It's kids who are who are first or second offenders in this county. Some counties it's even earlier than that. But the idea is to sort of stem the tide of those moving on through the system to those more expensive services.
You mentioned something, too, about early intervention versus later intervention and doing both. I find it a little ironic that we still have folks in public policy debates who seem to think it has to be one or the other, and they end up sometimes getting neither. When we had debates about accountability, imprisonment for violent offenders, some people said, well, that was taking away from prevention, and my perspective was, no, we were never doing enough prevention in the first place when we weren't funding accountability. Funding accountability does not necessarily mean, it could mean if someone makes that choice, but it doesn't necessarily mean refusing to look at early intervention or prevention. What you're trying to do in your milieu is cover all these angles, and you're trying to get some more resources. If folks believe, as I do, that we also need some earlier funding for Healthy Start and programs that help families before the kids are even 5 years old, that should be an additional resource, not a substitute resource. Am I on the track here? I think the juvenile directors have never said we shouldn't do Healthy Start, let's just do juvenile intervention.
You're absolutely correct. We need to do both of those things. And, you know, the alternative is to basically write off a generation that we're not going to deal with. But the fallacy with that argument is these older adolescent kids are about to become parents of potentially the next round of delinquents coming through. So
deal with me now or deal with them later.
Yes.
Well, you were also talking, besides philosophy, in Marion County in particular, you're looking at facilities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We've been actually for about 5 or 6 years now looking to expand our capacity for detention. We have a facility that's 37 years old, built in '63, designed for 18 youth, and we run 36 capacity now, and we're releasing youth early all the time, and so, I mean, it's very clear that we've outgrown that.
It's hard to give
facility.
an accountability message when it's sort of get out of, I'll call it jail-free card. But
that's exactly right, and you can really see the difference in terms of when we weren't at full capacity. I think kids really had a greater understanding and appreciation for the judge's ability to provide that level of consequence than they do now. So what the commissioners have chosen to do is we've looked at a variety of options, including going to the voters. We went to the voters a couple times in '95, narrowly missed the first time, and it was not quite as close the second time, but a lot has changed since then, Measure 47 and 50. There's a whole lot of issues that make it more difficult to get bond measures approved, operating levies approved. So the commissioners, working with a couple of community task forces, have made a decision to go ahead and begin a phased-in approach to address this problem. We had originally designed a new juvenile department building which would include all of our programs. What we are going to be doing now, starting right away, is building a first portion of that, which would be the expanded detention capacity. We'd be building 50 detention beds and whatever else goes with the detention facility, medical area, food service, gym, intake area, all those things that you have to have for a facility. And that would basically be the cornerstone of a long-range plan to add the other elements, including courtrooms and those sorts of things.
so we're going to talk an incremental expansion of facilities rather than an immediate expansion.
Right. And we're able to do that because we received a $4.7 million federal grant through the state for construction. And that gets us pretty close to the amount we need to build that level of the first step. Still to be resolved is the issue of operating expenses, which is long-term a more difficult issue than the construction. So we'll be, over the next couple of years, be trying to identify how to either acquire additional resources or realize cost savings of about $800 and some thousand per year to fund that additional expanded capacity.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to interrupt you because our time is just about up. I'd like to thank you for joining us on the show, Larry. And I'd like to thank our audience for joining us. You've been hearing from Larry Oglesby, who's the director of the Juvenile Department for Marion County, espousing the changes that have come about in the terms of juvenile justice, especially the emphasis on prevention and early intervention, but also consideration of consequences. We hope that you'll join us next time on the Kevin Mannix Report as we talk about other issues confronting us in the community. Take care.